Yeah, hello everyone, welcome to another podcast. Today's episode 20 of the Chatbox podcast with me, Ben Lister. Today's guest is Robin Blamires, the radio critic. This was done back in May, so yeah, we just chat about the history of radio and his journey in radio so far and how he met legends in radio. So here it is, enjoy, and I'll see you for the wrap up. Hello everyone, welcome to another Chatterbox podcast. It's episode 22. How are you doing today? Right, let's crack on. As you know, each week we have a guest to talk about their career or job. So let's crack on. This week's guest, he's a podcaster and broadcaster, and he has autism just like me, and he is a legend. It's Robin Blamires. Hello, Robin.
Hello, Ben. I'm not sure if you can call it a career. It's never really been a job, but it has played a big part in my life.
How are you today?
How am I? I'm actually really good. I've not been great over the last year or so, but I'm actually, for the first time in about 6 months tomorrow, I'm actually traveling by train to London for a visit this weekend for the first time since the second lockdown. So I'm excited about that, actually getting out. So yeah, I'm in a good mood at present. Yeah.
That's good. And are you a bit of a radio analysis person then, radio nerd?
I'm really interested in radio. I'm not sure if I'm actually good at doing it or presenting now, but I've had a very long interest in it. It's always been interesting.
So that's good. 5 questions about broadcasting, and that 5 questions about broadcasting and podcasting, if that's okay.
It's absolutely fine. I might give some very long answers to some of the questions, but it's no problem. It's not a problem.
That's fine. Alan Hyde's interview went on for about 1 hour, 7 minutes.
I do want to hear, but I'm genuinely interested because he used to live where I'm from. Well, he lived in Kent for a while, and he made the jingles for a very popular presenter on what was then the local ILR station for Kent and Victor FM. He did the jingles for a guy called Caesar the Boogeyman. He was very popular, but he had quite an unfortunate end to his career. And yeah, it's not a nice story.
I can get you a podcast with Alan.
No, I can look it up on your website. I've listened to most of your other interviews.
No, I can get you a podcast with Alan if you like, you to interview him.
I'm not sure if I'd be capable of interviewing him myself. I'm very interested, but I don't think I'd be as good. I wouldn't want to touch any nerves. But
he's a chilled out bloke.
Yes, I would.
He has his own home studio.
Yeah, where's he living now?
Near Salisbury, down south.
Oh, that's in Wiltshire. Yes,
Hampshire.
Yes, in Hampshire.
His nearest racetrack's Thruxton.
Okay, yes.
Because he was good friends with Murray Walker.
Oh, Murray Walker. Yeah, he died last year, didn't he? Yeah.
Last month, and Alan Hyde was close friends with him.
Brilliant. I didn't know there was that sort of connection.
Because Alan Hyde did a bit of motorsport, but he also knows Ian Collins because he used to produce the jingles on TalkSport and Invictus.
Well, Ian Collins used to be a character on Caesar's show called The Yob, and there was another character on there called Venus, who was played by Bobby Pryor, who now reads the traffic on Radio 2 weekday afternoons. So quite a lot of talented people have come.
Are you a fan of Rylan?
Rylan, I think he's good on the radio. People give him a lot of stick, but I wouldn't be that big on his style presenting, but I think he's competent. When he was on the X Factor, I found him rather annoying, but I saw him as a guest on the television comedy show Room 101, and he actually made me laugh. He was a good storyteller, and it generally did make me laugh. So I think he's gotten better in that sense.
Yeah, I've known Alan through Facebook because I listen to his radio show, the Touring Car Show, but he also does a show on the radio station called The Wireless.
Oh, yes, I've heard of The Wireless.
There's also a presenter on there who I know called Diane Lake.
Diane Luke. Yes,
Yeah,
she used to present on, what was it, the Yorkshire Radio Network, Radio Hallam in Sheffield. I think she's
yeah,
now at Boomers. Well, when I lived in London first time, she was the first breakfast presenter on what was then the new Jazz FM. My dad listened to that a lot. I sort of gotten into it a bit later. It sort of shaped the sort of shows I presented at on student and community radio by playing soul and jazz music. It sort of shaped my enthusiasm for that. Diane Luke was the breakfast presenter, and the guy on mid mornings after her was another fella who sadly died a few years ago, Peter Young, who had come from Capital Radio, a very enthusiastic man about soul music. What he didn't know wasn't worth knowing, and a radio guy through and through. He was a big fan of the Pirates, Big L, Radio London, Kenny Everett. We would have worked with Kenny Everett on Capital Radio during the 70s. So it all ties together. It all ties together.
and also, did you hear about? There's also Julia Hartley-Burr on Talk Radio, as I said earlier.
Oh, I know of her. I don't agree with many of her thoughts, and I find her a bit toxic, to be honest. And she is a bit outspoken.
James Max as well.
Yes, I think he was on LBC at one time. Yeah.
There's a lot of good presenters out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really cottoned on to many speech broadcasters, but I think with the way that this is what social media and radio is good for, it can be cut down into bite-sized chunks. And I really enjoy watching James O'Brien's videos. They can take certain bits of it, so you don't have to listen to a whole show waiting for that bit of really good radio gold to pop up.
Julia Hartley-Burr's interviews, if I'm honest with you, go on for too long.
Do they go on for quite a long time? Yeah.
She misses out the top of the hour news because she grills the politicians like.
Well, she's not good at keeping to time then, which is never good on a breakfast show because people would shape their day around it if they listen to it day to day. I mean, Chris Wiles was really bad. Well, probably still is at keeping to time. But
I remember a video. I found a video on YouTube. It was the one where he went on a mobility scooter around the Globals building.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect. When that happened, when he started on Radio X, I thought it sort of touched a nerve with me because it was perfectly fine for him to muck about around the Global building and disrupt other people's shows. But when people came up and stared through the window at him, he lost his rag. He got really angry. One rule for him, another rule for everyone else. You can't but that's a trait with a lot of, and I've worked with a few big mouthed presenters. They're more than happy to joke about and humiliate other people, but when the joke's on them, it's not funny anymore.
Have you ever met Chris Tarrant?
I've not met Chris Tarrant before. I was meant to have seen him at one of the radio festivals I went to back in 2017, but unfortunately, it took place on the same day as the Manchester attacks at the it was the day after the Manchester attacks at the Ariana Grande conference, so they had to postpone the festival and they couldn't reschedule Chris Tarrant's interview. It was meant to be him being interviewed by Greg James, and that would have been really interesting.
Yeah, I remember the Manchester attacks.
Yeah, well, I was in London that night they happened because I was staying the night over there, and I didn't find out about it until I arrived at the festival that morning. I didn't switch the television on before I went. And it's rather ironic because when I was walking up there, I was listening to a podcast, one of the Desert Island Discs Radio 4 podcasts, and the castaway was Guy Garvey from Elbow, one of the big musicians from Manchester. And listening to that on what was actually a really crap morning for the city, that was an unfortunate irony.
Yeah, 5 questions if that's okay.
Yeah, you ready to? We got sidetracked there. Yeah, go on.
You ready to rumble in the jungle?
Ready to rumble with an H and possibly a baggy sweatshirt like PJ and Duncan. So yeah, when you're ready.
Okay, let's just go for it, shall we? Where did you start your career as a podcaster and a broadcaster?
Again, I don't know if you can call it a career, but I started off doing radio. I'd always been interested, but I'd never got the chance to do it practically until I started attending the University of Westminster on their radio production course. And it was an exciting time. This was around about 2005. Podcasting was very much in its infancy, and as was the student radio station at the University of Westminster, Smoke Radio, which, considering it was very new, everyone had high ideals for it. And it was just great to get involved with. It gave a structure to my life. It helped me develop a social life. And for me, it wasn't just a stepping stone. This was what I've like built up to. I thought it doesn't get better than this. Having my own show where it was a specialist soul show. I got to program the music and I also went to, it helps, but I got to go to a lot of gigs in London at places like the Jazz Cafe, seeing acts like Incognito, and I saw Earth, Wind and Fire at Wembley Arena. In fact, it didn't take that long to get to Wembley Arena or Wembley Stadium because the campus was based just 2 underground stops away from Wembley, so that was really convenient. But the station grew really quickly, and I was already producing highlights podcasts by the second semester, and that works because it helped to bring awareness of the station to people who hadn't heard it, and it also helped those who were involved. It allowed them to listen back to what they'd done, their shows, and to keep improving them. And the standard did get very high. In fact, a lot of people who were there in that first year have gone on to very successful careers in radio. Ricky Marshall, who was in my year, he's now the producer of the Zoe Ball Breakfast Show on Radio 2. A really talented, very determined guy. He ended up being the head of programming during my second year. So he was effectively my boss. I was by then looking after the production and the on-air imaging, because that was my other big interest in radio. And it took over my life to a point where just as I was about to start my third year on the degree, it was meant to be my final year, I had a manic episode, which was part caused by over-optimism of what I expected the final year to be, but also because of worries, where was I going to go afterwards? I hadn't really undertaken any work placements. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do, what station I wanted to work for. And this is interesting. I know it sort of deviates slightly, but this was around about mid-2007. And when I got sectioned, it was a couple of weeks after the launch of Hull's KCFM. That launched in August, on Yorkshire Day 2007, that launched. And I was told, no, go on.
Actually, one of my good friends was the first voice on KCFM, Steve Jordan.
Yes, the breakfast presenter, a very good breakfast presenter. He didn't just do breakfast, but he also used to present an 80s show on Thursday nights, which was brilliant. It was really lively and enthusiastic. And he would play 12-inch vinyl versions of songs. He was also a big Level 42 fan as well, which seems to be a trait with a lot of radio presenters.
And Rosie Madison used to work at KCFM as well.
Yeah, she was there from the beginning. Yes, I heard on the interview he did with her, but she was worried about messing up and getting things wrong technically. And I think she did a Sunday morning show on there. It was good that they had female presenters on there. They had a female mid-morning presenter on there who I liked, called Claire Westwood. She had a smile in her voice. She was only there for about a year, but I really liked her. I thought she was really good. She used to follow on from Steve Jordan. Then I think it was Al Dupre. And it was, I don't know if I can say this, it felt like an Anorak's wet dream of a radio station. It had a big, full Dallas song jingle package from TM Studios. And it just felt like the radio I'd grown up listening to when I was really little. And it didn't last that long at all. I mean, after I got sectioned, after I came out of being sectioned, I was really depressed, and so listening to it didn't feel as good as it did when it launched back in August. But the day I actually came out of hospital, this is interesting. I think there's another Hull connection here. Was the same day Radio 1 announced their autumn schedule changes, and those schedule changes didn't include JK and Joel. They were leaving the station after 3 years, which I was a little bit gutted about. They were doing the chart around that time, but they also did early breakfast. And it was an unfortunate omen because Joel's favourite broadcaster, I think Steve Jordan said this as well, his favourite broadcaster was Bruno Brooks. And unfortunately, him and JK and Joel were in the exact same time slot, but Bruno Brooks was in when he left Radio 1. So doing early breakfast and the chart on Sunday. And it was rather sad when they left. It was on Radio 1's 40th birthday. I was very, very ill, so I could sort of feel their pain of having to leave the station they dreamed of working at. So yeah.
And also there was a guy as well called Paul Gambaccini.
Oh, I'm glad you've mentioned Paul Gambaccini, because in the last year I've sort of added to my collection of radio publicity cards. And this one arrived in the mail today. If I put it a bit nearer to the camera, this is a publicity card of Paul Gambaccini when he was at Capital Gold in the late 80s, when he was part of a very big lineup. I don't know if you can see it that way. It's signed as well. I'll send you a grab of it. That was from around about 1988, I think that was, because Paul was at Capital for 5 years. He'd left Radio 1 in 86. Then he went to Capital Radio, and he went back to Radio 1 around about the early 90s to do some documentaries, which went out on a Saturday lunchtime between Adrian Just and Johnny Walker. I can remember this rather lengthy one he did about David Bowie, which, I mean, but that man's an expert in pop, and he works with JK and Joel on quite an embarrassing ITV quiz show called Sing It Back, where you had to sing the next line of a song, and he was like this big judge, and that was an odd show.
Yeah, because JK and Joel as well. JK and Joel now are no longer JK and Joel.
No, well, they split up about 4 years after they left Radio 1. They did carry on as a pair together on television. They used to do a CBBC show called Hider in the House. And because I can remember seeing that, because when I was very ill, a lot of it, because I've been interested in television a long time. I loved live television. I used to love things like the Broom Cupboard on CBBC, where a lot of radio people were sort of started off. So Andy Crane, Simon Parkin, Toby Yancey, they used to do that before they furthered their radio careers.
Was Philip Schofield on the radio?
Yes, he was on the radio. Well, I only realised that he was on radio before the Broom Cupboard when I read his autobiography. He'd done radio in New Zealand because he moved with his family to New Zealand, but he came back to the UK, and he was on Capital Radio for a short time doing overnights before he got the gig at CBBC. And then he went to do a Sunday afternoon show at Radio 1 after he started doing Saturday mornings. He basically brought the Saturday morning show to radio. It was called Going Live on Radio 1. And it used to go out on Sundays before the top 40 with either Bruno Brooks or Mark Goodyear. I do remember that very clearly. And it was all this enjoyment of listening to radio that sort of built up to the manic episodes. And it took a very long time for me to recover from it. I know this is slightly deviating from my own radio career and talking about other people's, but I did graduate. Go on.
For some reason as well, I read somewhere that Hairsty used to do the Capital Chart show, took it over from Neil.
Well, it wasn't just the Capital Chart show, it was on the whole ILR network, or all the ILRs that took the station. He took over Hit 40 UK, and about a year after he took over with Katie Hill, I'd met him at a pub meet it was the website Jingle Mad had put on an event at a pub, because I'm a very big Jingle fan. I love stuff like the old Jam stuff, the Century 21 stuff, and probably not as much as Hairsty or our mutual friend Dave Nightingale. But we went up to the Global building. Well, it was the GCAP building then, whilst he was doing the chart.
I think the reason Hairsty we're going to say, because I don't want to get confused, because my brain can get mashed. Sorry.
Well, so can mine, actually, as well. We've already demonstrated that.
Yeah. Because I read somewhere she got dropped because Bauer launched another chart show.
Well, that's interesting. I'll go into that in a minute, but when it was Simon Hurst, he was doing the show with Katie Hill, and I went up with a few of the people who were at this Jingle Mad pub meet. We went from this pub in Oxford Street to the GCAT building in Leicester Square around about 7 o'clock, and Hursty came out with Katie Hill, and my mouth burst wide open. I was just stunned at meeting the woman I'd seen on Blue Peter 10 years earlier. And she couldn't have been any more nicer. She finished a personal phone call on her mobile to speak to myself, Dave, and a few of the others. She was really loving it. It was a shame that she ended up leaving after a couple of months, but it meant that Hursty got to do the show on his own. And as he mentioned, the reason Simon Hurst, as she was known then, ended up leaving was because Barrow were about to start taking Hit 40 because they ditched their own chart, the Smash Hits chart, which had been running since Pepsi dropped sponsorship of the network chart and it became Hit 40 UK. And because the show was going to go out on stations in Yorkshire that had rival breakfast shows to her, one on Galaxy, and they'd be training it during the week as well. They didn't want Hursty to be presenting on a show that was a rival breakfast show that was on stations that were against her on breakfast. So that's when Lucio took over.
Yeah, and now it's present. Yeah, because I remember Capital FM Breakfast when it was Hasty on Capital FM Breakfast in Yorkshire. I remember in the networked main one, it was Dave Berry and Lisa Snowden, I think.
Yeah, it would have been Dave and Lisa. It wasn't networked, it came from London. That was the London, because everyone had their own breakfast show. It wasn't until 2019 when it became national.
Why did it become networked?
Well, because it's a business. It has to make money, and I mean, this has been discussed at great length, but it wouldn't, because there's basically too many local radio stations, and a lot of them weren't making a lot of money. There are lots of very small ones in areas already served by ILRs. So I'm trying to think of an example. Like KCFM was like the second ILR station to come from Hull, which has already been served by Viking FM, and that never really made any money, even though it was a really good station in its first couple of years before Links FM took
taken over by Nation.
Yeah, Nation own it now, but they take the greatest. But yeah, bringing it back to because it's a question about my supposed radio career. After I graduated, I went back to Canterbury, and it was a big come down. I really wanted to go back to London, and I'd already felt some of it by having to stay at home after my manic episode and being diagnosed with bipolar. But coming back permanently hit hard. I did get involved in a community and student station in Canterbury called CSR, which it took a bit of time for me to find my voice properly, but I stayed there for about 10 years in total. During that time, I was taking work placements in London, and one of them was with a company called Folded Wing, an indie who produced shows such as Jamie Cullum's on Radio 2, his jazz show, and The Selector for the British Council. And what made this work placement stand out is that the woman who founded the company was a really lovely woman called Karen, who I became friends with, met up for coffee a couple of times after the work placement, and I got talking about an idea I had of making a podcast about my manic episodes and turning it into some sort of soundscape. And eventually we got to do it. And it led to the podcast being reviewed in the national press, in the Metro, and in Miranda Sawyer's radio column in The Observer, which was really exciting because I'd loved reading her articles, and she did not hold back. She would, if she thought something was rubbish, or she would say so. And for her to like something that I'd made, the Insides of the Mind of a Hypermanic podcast, which I think you can still find on SoundCloud, that meant a lot. And the success of the press coverage led to me being interviewed on the World Service by none other than Matthew Bannister on the Outlook program, and that meant a lot to me because I know he's some sort of viewed as a monster within some radio circles because he took over Radio 1 in the 90s and gave it a big revamp by sacking that's completely wrong, sacking some of the older disc jockeys, and such as Dave Lee Travis and Simon Bates. He did make mistakes, but he made the station into what it ends up as now. And there's no nicer guy. He was really lovely. It was a really enjoyable interview.
Because I remember something about Chris Evans when he used to be, when he had that short original spell with the original Virgin.
Yeah, who's this?
Chris Evans.
Chris Evans. Well, yes, because Matthew Bannister hired Chris Evans. He was doing television then. He'd done a short stint at Virgin doing a Saturday morning show, the Nescafe Big Red Mug show, but that was around the time he would have been doing the Big Breakfast. And because that, and Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, sort of got in the way of radio, he sort of stepped away from it, but he did get involved in Radio 1. Matthew Bannister hired him, and we all know the story after what happened after that.
Yeah, I remember it because he used to take alcohol when he was at Virgin Radio and Radio 1.
Well, he used to. I don't think he drank in the studio. He definitely brought his own toaster into Egton House, which that was a sign of his power. And but yeah, that was interesting.
Question 2: who in broadcasting and podcasting are your inspirations?
In podcasting, probably my favorite podcast is this one called Distraction Pieces, hosted by the rapper and poet and now actor Scroobius Pip, who basically interviews loads of really interesting people. He's had people like Simon Pegg on there, Stephen Graham. He's interviewed quite a lot of radio people as well. But one of the best podcasts he did was with Eddie Temple Morris from Virgin Radio, who at the time he was at XFM, he spoke very openly about his mental health struggles, and it was just really good. And other podcasts I quite like are Adam Buxton's podcast. He gets very good guests on there, but I'm not sure if they inspire me because I've not done any proper podcasts for a good number of years. I'm not sure if I'm that well connected with people to want to interview them. I mean, I've had people on before. I've interviewed Johnny Beerling, the former controller of Radio 1, and I've interviewed a few musicians. But it's knowing where to go from there. In radio, I'm trying to think of who my favourite broadcasters, those I've listened to. What inspired me? I used to love listening to Steve Wright on Radio 1. Many people say that he's exactly the same now as he was then on Radio 1 on Radio 2, but back in 1989, 1990, I thought the show had a bit more of an edge. It sounded a lot more energetic and less of a parody than it's. I know it's very popular and he still has very good figures, but I find it a bit of a struggle to listen to. He's become a sort of a caricature of himself. But back in 1990, he used to do lots of really funny sketches, had lots of characters, and he had people with him such as Richard Easter. And I reckon Richard Easter was to Steve Wright what Comedy Dave was to Chris Moyles. He came up with all the ideas, and Wrighty supposedly took all the credit for them. And you do notice a difference in the shows without them, the same way that Comedy Dave has a massive void in Moyles' show on Radio X. Which other broadcasters? I love listening to Lisa Tarbuck on her Radio 2 show. She has a Saturday night show. She chooses all the music, which is surprisingly eclectic. You can go from the Stone Roses to Stan Getz. You can go from The Cure to Noel Coward, but Lisa's humour sort of helps it flow. She bases it all on listener letters and interaction. So that, I think, makes her the natural successor to Terry Wogan. She's really good despite not being from a traditional radio background, but I used to love watching her on The Big Breakfast when she presented with Johnny Vaughan on that. I think she was his best co-presenter on there, and she brought that humour from The Big Breakfast onto her Radio 2 show, which I think she gets from her dad, Jimmy, the stand-up comedian, and her mum, Pauline, who she often refers to. there's quite a lot of in jokes around that, but it is very entertaining. It's one of the few shows I still listen to now.
Yeah, brilliant. One of my inspirations is I've said some of mine already, but I just love radio media. I've interviewed people like Martin Kellner.
Yes, Martin Carerer. Yes, I saw him do a pub quiz at the radio festival, which was quite good fun. And I've met the guy who used to play Dora Dale, Jake Yap, at quite a few events, who's very cutting but very funny. And yeah, he's made me laugh very hard.
Yeah, and we also have over here people. I've also had Rob Charles on my podcast.
Oh yes, the guy who does. Well, I suppose he's known not by name, but nationally for being one of the presenters on Forever FM on Peter Kay's Car Share.
He's also been on lots of different radio stations as
Of
well.
course, in Manchester and the Northwest, yes.
He was at Century.
Century 105, yes, yeah. He would have been on about one time.
Yeah, because he used to be on Rock FM.
Res Rock FM, yes.
There's only one show on Rock FM now, and that's hosted by someone called Olivia
Oh,
and Joel. Is it
Olivia
Joel?
I think she used to work at KMFM at one time before in near my neck of woods in Kent before going on to Barra. She's done really well for herself.
Is it JK or Joel who works with her?
Joel Ross, who now does breakfast on Rock FM.
JK now does Heart London.
Yeah, Drive Time on Heart with Kelly Brook, yes. There's another one for the big
called
breakfast.
Lucy.
Yeah, with Lucy. I don't know if Lucy's still on there, but I think it's Kelly Brook now who he co-presents with.
I don't know what her second name was. Lucy.
No, it's escaped me as well.
Yeah, because there's someone on Radio Solvent called Lucy
Ambash, Radio Solent. I mean, that's where I'm headed to this weekend. I'm on my way up to London. I'm making a slight detour in Portsmouth. So I won't be too far from where Radio Solent's based.
She does stuff on the radio station called Max FM.
That's in the whereabouts is that? The Isle of Man.
No, there's one in Devon and there's one in the Midlands.
Oh yeah, I misheard that. Yes, I thought you meant Manx. And yeah,
because they have John Fox on breakfast.
Yeah. Oh, the guy who used to be part of Foxy and Giuliano.
Yeah, I don't know if them two are still together.
No, they haven't been for a long time. But they went from. It used to be Foxy and Tom when they were at Viking, and then they went to 210 FM in Reading, because around the time of my Manic episode, they would have been doing breakfast, and Giuliano was the traffic reporter.
Yeah. There's a lot of good radio stations, and it's a shame, and some radio stations have been removed, and there's a new thing coming out as well called the GB News as well.
Oh yes, Andrew Neil's new television station.
And Rupert Murdoch's kicking one off as well, a new one.
Yeah, but whether they'll be able to be as outspoken as the Americans might be a bit tricky with them being. Oh, excuse me. I do apologise. I've never burped on air before, so there's a first for everything here on a podcast. That probably explains why I'm not on the radio anymore, or at present anyway.
Did you know? And what do you think about? Do you think GB News can be successful in this current climate?
I don't know. It's got a potential. It will be noticed on launch, but whether it can keep that up afterwards, I'm not sure. Because it's a very crowded marketplace. It's the marketplace for rolling news channels is becoming bigger, and GB News has quite. Most of the broadcasters are of sort of a right-wing approach. So even though they have got some ones who you would expect to be of that, so. It might be balanced in that sense, but
they've got Alistair Stewart,
yes.
Simon McCoy,
yes, he's joining them.
And apparently, I was told somewhere that Piers Morgan was supposed to be joining.
That wouldn't surprise me if he did. Nothing's been confirmed, but it wouldn't be a surprise if he did end up on there.
But he's got lots of people, and Andrew Neil wants him on board.
Yeah.
But he says he just has to sort the salary out.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah. One of my favourite. What do you think to my podcast series then?
It's really, you've got a very good list of guests. And I genuinely don't feel worthy amongst people such as Stephanie Hurst, Neil Fox, Martin Kellner, Milo and Rosie. So, yeah, it's nice to be on here.
Even Bruno Brooks may be coming on in a few months.
Oh, that would be great if you got Bruno Brooks on there. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that he was one of my favourite people to do the chart rundown. The earliest I can remember on there. It may sound a little bit dated now, but the energy he put into it and the speediness of it, it made it a must listen. And the overall, I mean, what I really liked at the time back in the late 80s is because it used to go out on Radio 2 on their FM frequencies on a Sunday. And Radio 1 used to broadcast on Radio 2 on FM before they got Radio 4 they got on FM full time. And by the late 80s, when Radio 1 was starting to get on FM in more parts of the country, the time they spent on Radio 2 became less. And by 1988-89, they were only on Radio 2 at weekends for Roger Scott's show and the chart rundown. And at 7 o'clock on Sunday, Bruno would do his last link after playing the #1 single, very fast paced, up to the Pips at 7 o'clock. Then after the Pips, you got a very posh sounding Radio 2 announcer welcoming back listeners on FM who they stay for the rest of the evening, play the news jingle, and it sounded like a completely different station from how it did 5 seconds ago. That's what was really exciting, and it's sort of like one of my earliest radio memories.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of. In my household, we have Capital Dance and Smooth.
Oh yes, Capital Dance.
Because there's a Mr. Jam.
Mr. Jam, yes, he used to be on Radio 1 Extra, and yes, he joined Capital Dance last year. That was quite a big grab for them.
Yeah, joined from Radio 1.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he did do, I think, a show on Radio on Saturday evenings. He was on Radio 1 Extra's Drive Time show. And he worked at one of the alumni from Smoke Radio, Nick Bright, who was in the year below me, is now a presenter on 1 Extra. He's been there for 11 years. Really nice guy, very talented guy. And he has done very well. He's one of the success stories from Smoke Radio. Even though he never did a show on there, he was actually the station voice for all the jingles around the time I left. So he has done very well.
And also, do you listen to Debbie Mack ever?
I've heard now and again on Greatest Hits. I mean, I would have definitely heard on the day when I was, because I listened for when Simon Mayo did her first show. But I've known of her for a long time. I've never met her, but she was one of the presenters, because I have family in East Anglia. Back in the late 90s, there was a station that launched there called Vibe FM, which is now Kiss. That was a dance station for East Anglia, and Debbie Mack was one of the first presenters on there, along with, who else was on there? Matt Wrighton did a really good evening show on there that was quite entertaining, The Big Noise at Night. And Dave Wartnaby, or Dave Kelly as he is known, who's the guy who's the station voice for Heart. He was a presenter on Vibe FM when it launched, and you'll definitely know his voice. He also used to be the voice of this character called Flynn in the BBC game show 50/50, which is quite surreal but good fun.
Also, Debbie Mack's actually close friends with Stephanie Hurst as well.
Well, yes, but I think they're both Yorkshire people. They've worked probably not at the same time, but they were on Hallam FM.
And Galaxy.
Oh, Galaxy as well, yeah.
I always thought it used to be associated with the Galaxy chocolate bar.
Easy mistake to make. But yes, Galaxy, and that was a really good set of stations. In fact, Ashley Tabor, when he purchased them at Global, he really wanted to keep the Galaxy brand, but Capital had much of a stronger presence, so that's why he got turned to Capital and all the Galaxy stations.
in 2011.
Yeah, very early 2011. Yeah.
So remember the Capitol 105 building in Leeds.
Yes. I've never been there, but Karen, the woman I worked with at Folded Wing to produce my podcast, works there when it was Galaxy on a work placement, and they sent her out to do the cinema reviews, and she did all the things that everyone else didn't want to do, and that led her to her career producing at Radio One and setting up her own indie. I
It's
really
just
loved it.
it's just down the road from Radio Air, really, and next door to Radio Air you have ITV, which used to be Yorkshire Television.
Kirkstall Road. Well, my other half of the family come from Yorkshire. My dad's half of the family come from Yorkshire, so I do have quite fond memories of watching Yorkshire Television and Calendar, and I can remember it being a big deal when Krista Ackroyd moved from Calendar to Look North about 20
She was
years
the
ago.
person at Radio Air who I think mentored Stephanie Hurst in the early days.
Well, she would have been program controller at Radio Air at the time.
So she mentored her, I think.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's weird because
Krista
she's
Ackroyd was
mentoring Danny Myler and Rosie.
Stephanie's mentoring Danny Milo, but when Stephanie Hurst started at Radio Air, Krista Ackroyd would have been the program controller around about the late 80s, and then she moved from around. Krista Ackroyd, I think, joined YTV, Yorkshire Television, in 1990. That would have been around the same time Radio Air split frequency.
Did you know that? Sorry. Did you know that I had one of her good friends on a podcast recently, a former co-presenter on Look North?
Who, Peter Levy?
No, the other
Or
one.
Harry Braden?
Yeah.
You got him on, but I've not listened to that one yet, but I will get around to it. That is a big deal. If you got him, you've done really well there.
Because Krista has agreed to do one with me.
Who's agreed to do one with you?
Krista.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be interesting because I've never heard her being interviewed.
I've interviewed the people who are being mentored by Stephanie Hurst, and now I'm interviewing her, the person who mentored her and gave her first job in radio.
Yeah, so that will be interesting. Yeah,
I love Krista and Harry.
Yeah, they presented together for quite a long time. Yes, at least 10 years, I think it was.
Yeah, and also there's because Harry Gratian knew Stephanie Hurst.
Well, yeah, well he's presented Look North for about on and off for about over. Well, he's just left recently, but he was on there for about 40 years. He did take a brief sabbatical at South Today for a few years, but BBC's Hampshire and Dorset regional news program. But he went back up north and I only knew that he was back on Look North when I saw him make a guest appearance on Noel Edmonds' House Party, doing a spoof regional news flash for an NTV victim. So that was an odd way of seeing him back on television, because we spent Christmas.
Because Krista used to work with Richard Whiteley.
Yeah, well, Richard Whiteley was the host of Calendar for, I think, nearly 30 years when it launched in 1968. It was him and Austin Mitchell, the MP. And Countdown started off as a regional programme from Yorkshire. It was called Calendar Countdown. And when Channel 4 launched it, moved to Channel 4. It was the first ever programme on Channel 4, and it's still going.
Did he present Calendar and Look North, Calendar and Countdown at the same time at one point?
Yeah, he would have done, yes, certainly for the first 14 years. He left Calendar, I think, around about 95, 96, and that's when Mike Morris took over, who used to be on TVAM, because Bruce Gingell, his old boss at TVAM, started running Yorkshire and Tyne Tees, and he hired him to present Calendar.
And Michael Parkinson as well.
Yes, I know you're a big fan of Michael Parkinson.
I've got an autograph in here somewhere.
Well, I've got I mean, it's in my folder in the other room, but I've got a photo of Michael Parkinson from when he presented on LBC News Talk back in the early 90s. He was on LBC for a short period. I've got a photo of him from when he was on there.
Wow.
And that was alongside people such as Douglas Cameron, Angela Rippon. Who else was on there? Clive Ball, he's still there now. So this is around about when I was still living in London. because Mum and Dad used to listen to LBC first thing in the morning.
You know, there's a presenter as well who I know as well called Glenn Pinder.
Glenn Pinder, I've heard his name. I'm not sure which station he's on. But
He was
I've
on
seen
Magic and Radio Air.
Magic 828. Yes. That sort of makes sense now.
Because I've interviewed all three Magic presenters at the same time: Darren Leaf, Glenn Pinder, and Neil Fox.
Yes, they would have all been on the same station at the same time, but they've all been on Magic at one time or
At
other.
the same time, because they all
I guess
used to present breakfast.
Well, I think you can include Steve Jordan in that, because before he joined KCFM, he was at Magic 1161.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and he was also at Viking.
Yeah, well, 2 stints at Viking. He joined there from Links FM,
and then he got dropped by KCFM. I've been told, because the Links FM group didn't like him moving to Viking.
they'd still not gotten over that, and that's why he disappeared from KCFM. I'm not sure if that was the whole reason, but I was gutted when that did happen.
And then he ended up at Radio City.
Yeah, in Liverpool.
And now he's in Derby.
Yeah, Radio Derby, I've heard him on there. I listened to him actually interviewing one of his radio heroes a few months ago. He interviewed Mark Goodyear, which is quite interesting.
I'd love to interview Mark Goodyear.
Oh, that would be brilliant. I mean, I've met him quite a lot. I was even on a work placement at his company, Wise Buddha, doing interning for their imager department, which was involved making a lot of jingles and branded intros.
To interview a friend of mine, actually. I'll tell you a story. Tried to get me Debbie Mack, but she couldn't due to contractual issues.
Yeah, that's always a bit of an obstacle.
I don't know how to get around the contractual issues.
Yeah,
because
it's better not to get too tangled up in it. But yeah,
all I want is a podcast to tell her story. That's all.
Yeah, to give her, and it would inspire other people to get, because she's one of the best female presenters on the radio, and it would help inspire other people, certainly other female presenters, to come forward, and they don't get enough credit. It's good to see them evolve, them be more of them, but I just think it's really frustrating it's taken that long to get there.
Yeah, and also it's a bit like, because one of my friends actually was watching. I love radio at the moment. I love radio. One of my early inspirations was over here when I used to listen to Kirsty's Daily Dose.
Yes,
with
Danny Oakes and Jojo. Well, Jojo's still on Capital. Adam and Jojo, they're doing the Drive show now.
I don't know about Danny.
No, not Danny. Jojo. Adam and Jojo.
I was told that Danny had a mental health ep.
Well, I wouldn't want to go too much into it. I don't know them personally. I've only met Kirsty, but Jojo deserves credit because she's been on the station in that building in Leeds since it was Kiss 105, because it got taken over by Christmas after only about 6 months. It became Galaxy, and she's done well to be on there for that long.
And then I didn't like the way Kirsty was treated when she signed the contract with Galaxy on Viking. They put her hair on overnights, because I remember Jonathan Gould's video. Yeah. Who is Jonathan Gould?
He's a presenter he grew up in Hull, but he's worked on stations such as SGR in Colchester, Q Radio in Belfast. I'm very good friends with him on Facebook, and last year he helped me get through lockdown by posting up all his cassette recordings of local radio, not just from where he grew up, so not just Viking FM and Radio Humberside, but also his visits to London. So you also got audio of Capital FM and from where I grew up in Victor FM in Kent, and that brought back a lot of some of the happiest memories of listening to the radio, because it sounded very exciting, very fast paced, and it was just really enjoyable to hear it all back again.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Very fond memory.
Question 3, and we've been on nearly an hour.
Oh no, you're going to have to do a lot of editing here.
Nah, don't edit. We just go with the flow here.
You
I just
sure?
go
I
with the
can't
flow.
go on for more than that. I can't let you go on. I'm happy to talk for that length, but
It,
people won't want to listen to me
Alan
talk.
Hyde's went on for an hour and 7 minutes.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
me and you and him are very interesting.
yeah.
We just
Well, I'm
talk about
glad you
things
think
that are very interesting.
yeah,
Grip the full story.
yeah. But I haven't really told my story. I've just basically talked for a very long length of time about radio I've enjoyed listening to, and not a lot about what I've done because my love of radios has led to like big things. The biggest things I've done in radio were linked to my manic episodes, and not long after, because I was at
I was
CFR.
listening to one of your podcasts actually.
Which one? Which one?
The one about 2018 radio.
Oh, the compilations. I forgot about that. Yes, they were good fun to put together. The What Radio Used to Sound Like series, because it started off from when I was converting my own cassettes, a bit like what I mentioned with Jonathan Gold, but put them into compilations where I topped and tails them. And that mechanic was inspired by a brilliant Radio 2 series, a lot better than what I've done, Sounds of the 20th Century with Jeremy Vine, where it was just him introducing a soundscape of audio from a year. And I did that with my cassette recordings, which dated back from around 2000 to 2002. And after I did that, I thought, well, I'll convert my mini discs from during the time when I was at university, from college up to university. And my favorite one from that, I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but it was the episode of mid 2007, because that was from the summer that led to my manic episode. So it's got a lot of the launch of KCFM on there, and Tony Blackburn's first show at KMFM where I was. But no, the 2018 episode, I think in the 30s, that's probably my favorite out of that, because that was from the period when Joe Wiley and Simon Mayo started presenting together. And I genuinely think I was the only person who enjoyed listening to that show, because it was around the time I moved to a new flat in Margate, and listening to them every day, although it was awkward, it felt like having a mum and dad in the room listening to them, who might not have been on a good place themselves. But I liked the format of it. Features they had, like the End of Days game, the Sundowners. Joe Wiley, to her credit, is really good at picking a really good reflective tune to finish the show with. And she brought that from her show to her show with Simon by picking really two good mellow and reflective tunes to finish an otherwise chaotic show. But I understand why it finished, and Simon sounds a lot happier now on his show on Greatest Hits Radio, Simon Mayo. And now that it's in London, it goes out on FM in London, he seems even more happier. But no, that was a lot of fun to put together, the Decade
Does
with
he
No
do it?
Name.
I think he does his show from Manchester.
No, he doesn't do it from Manchester, Simon, mate. He does it from One Golden Square in London.
Where does
He's,
Debbie Mack do her show from then?
I think she does it in Manchester. And
Yeah,
so does Andy Crane, because that's where he lives now.
because they do it inside the Hits Radio building.
Yeah, so Debbie Max would come from Manchester. Simon Mayo definitely does his from One Golden Square, because he lives around the Holloway area. He's a big Tottenham fan, so obviously he's going to be based in North London.
Neil Fox lives right near Stamford Bridge because he does his program from his shed.
Well, I've been to Stamford Bridge not to see any games, but they have a great concert venue under the bridge, and I used to go to a lot of gigs there. I saw people such as Incognito and the band The Christians there a few years ago, and it took them a lot of guts, because they're from Liverpool, they're big Liverpool FC fans, so it took them a lot of guts to play at a venue below Chelsea, to play below Stamford Bridge. But no, that's a really good gig venue.
Yeah, it was also on his radio show a few weeks ago as well.
Yeah.
About he was driving along in London and he saw a plaque and it said Bob Marley lived here.
Yeah. Whereabouts was that? It must have been somewhere in South London. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a house or something.
Yeah.
he was talking about it, saying that it was interesting to read. He pulled his car up and just read it for 5 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's 40 years this year since Bob Marley died. So that's sort of might have what spurred on the talking point.
Yeah, and he was talking about Phil Collins' Easy Lover, saying that he used to play the drums back in the day, I think,
Yeah.
to that song.
Well, I saw the guy who he duetted with on Easy Lover, Philip Bailey, when I went to see Earth, Wind and Fire at Wembley Arena during my first year at university. And that was really exciting. The gig went very quickly. I mean, it didn't take me that long to get there because the campus I was on was only 2 underground stops away from Wembley Arena. So it was very heady. It was a very
Did you
heady
see
time.
Phil Bailey in the flesh?
I didn't meet him in the flesh. It was I had a friend who was a very big Earth, Wind and Fire fan who got to meet the band Verdine White and Philip Bailey and some of the other members. Yeah.
And also the best, yeah, because one of the best songs I heard on one of these stations is I was listening to Greatest Hits the other day, Jen Powell.
Jenny Powell, yes, yes. I do like her. I used to watch her on television when I was little. She used to do Saturday mornings with Pat Sharp and Andy Crane. So there's another one who's transfers well to radio.
Pat Sharp sometimes a guest on Tony Blackburn's Sunday evening show.
Well, that's would surprise me because I think that Pat Sharp is Tony Blackburn's real son. It comes across like that. They have a similar sense of humour. And I mean, I've joked that Pat Sharp is Tony Blackburn's son. He's not really, but it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of friends. Tim Gibson, if you've heard of him.
Yeah, I have heard of it. He was the program controller of KCFM when that launched, and he was at Viking. He launched their, I think their Great Yorkshire Golds or their Viking Golds, as it was then. That was one of the first stations to split frequencies in Yorkshire when, in the late 80s, they had to broadcast a different output on AM to what they had on FM or the other way around. So yeah, I know.
Yeah, and a few of my friends also broadcast on a station called Yorkshire Coast Radio.
Oh yes, Yorkshire Coast Radio. Well,
Paddy Billington.
Yes, I've heard of it.
And there's a lot of ex-KCFM presenters as well. Like, do you remember Amy on the Late Night Love Affair in later KCFM?
If you mentioned a surname, I might know.
Her real name's Anne-Marie.
Okay, but yeah, I've probably
Tim
seen
Gibson's wife.
Oh, all right. Yes, that makes sense. So she probably would have been on when I listened to the station.
Yeah, because it used to be an RSL.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and there was also, and one of my colleagues told me a story that he met Craig Charles at Viking once.
He met Craig Charles at Viking?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sort of time nicely because I've been watching all the Red Dwarfs back on Netflix. So and he's on the radio as well. He does a funk and soul show on Six Music, which is sort of a bit too energetic for my liking, but it did influence what I used to play on my radio show in Canterbury when I used to present a soul show on there. And that was really good.
I've played a bit of Northern Soul today in my radio's training.
Oh, brilliant. Which Northern Soul song?
Al Wilson,
Snake. Yes, I love the Snake. Yes. I mean, whenever Craig Charles would stand in on Steve Wright's show on Radio 2, you couldn't get through any show without him playing either the Snake or this one by this Italian guy called Mario Biondi, who's this big white guy who sounds like Barry White, but with even more of a sore throat. I've never really gotten into him, but Craig Charles is obsessed by him.
Yeah. So what's your... I can imagine, because Mark Goodyear used to do breakfast cover for Chris Evans sometimes.
Yes, yes. Well, when Sarah Cox was, I used to love Sarah Cox standing in on breakfast, and I was gutted when she didn't get it full time. I mean, it was inevitable. I don't think her drive time show is as good as when she used to stand in for Chris Evans on breakfast. And if she was to get the gig now, I wouldn't be as excited. That ship has sailed. Radio 2 has changed a lot since then. It's trying to aim at a younger audience, but at the same time, they're alienating those who did listen, who are slightly older.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it's changed now. Like Radio 1's changed for the younger generation.
Well, Radio One's constantly evolving. It has to, because it is aimed at a younger audience. And Greg James is doing very well on breakfast. I haven't listened to him for quite a while though, because the thing with, like, you listen to a show, it becomes difficult. I mean, this sort of answers the next question you're going to ask me about how the coronavirus has affected like how I do radio. It sort of discouraged me from wanting to listen, because you sort of get fed up with like the in jokes and the certain things. It becomes, I mean, I understand that it's popular, but after a while, it's a case of familiarity breeding contempt.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, who which radio presenter, dead or alive, no offense, would you like to meet in the future?
Who I'd like to meet, who's still living. I'd love to meet Pat Sharp. I've never met him before, but he seems like a really nice guy. And people I've spoke to who've met him
Have you
have
met Tony Blackburn?
I've met him quite a few times. I did actually met him 2 days after Radio 1's 40th birthday. And this was when I was still very ill, recovering from my manic episodes. He was doing a book sign at Bluewater, which is a shopping centre the very west of Kent, at a Waterstones. He just published his second autobiography, because he's released one back in the 80s. He'd released another in 2007, Poptastic. And I went to get it signed and met him. He was a really lovely guy. I was like a rabbit in the headlights, because I was still recovering from the medication of the manic episode. But I have met him since. The last time I think was at the Audio Production Awards, where I met his wife Debbie, and we chatted about their favourite Italian restaurant, which is Sergio's in London, which is where I went after my graduation with my mum and dad. But that restaurant's quite significant in radio, because it's based near Broadcasting House, and it was where Trevor Dan, who at the time was at Radio 1, he met with John Revel, who was a mate of Chris Evans, to discuss the possibility of him joining Radio 1 and what led him to getting the breakfast show there. So a very well-known Italian place, and Tony Blackburn's favourite Italian place.
John Peel as well.
Yes, and I would have probably liked to have met John Peel. My dad was probably more a fan than I was, but I loved his sense of humour. I loved his dry wit. And the fact is that many people will laud him, but he just would probably find it all hilarious. He didn't think he was, he never believed his own hype. He just carried on championing a lot of bands who have gone on to become successful, right up to when he died at the untimely age of, I think it was 65 when he died.
Yeah. Yeah, and also it's good that different presenters have different styles.
Yes, and I suppose one of my favourite presenters, I mean, because quite a few, because you talk about presenters who I'd love to have met who are now dead. One was a guy from Capital Radio called Roger Scott, who many people refer to him as the DJ's DJ. And he had a very good word economy. He was a big fan of Bruce Springsteen as well. Although my favourite shows that he did weren't at Capital. He went to Radio 1 in the late 80s before he died from cancer at only 43 years old. He was very good with word economy and just a brilliant music broadcaster, very eclectic and surprising. And another guy, I think my favourite broadcaster from where I grew up in Kent, was the guy who died at only 52 years old. He used to be a presenter at Invicta FM, Tim Stewart, who, again, there was nothing that special about him, but he was very good at doing formatted radio. He made it sound easy, and I never met him, but he came across as like a really nice guy. And he also went to Dallas, Texas to record what ended up being one of my favorite ever radio jingle packages for Invicta FM at Century 21 in Dallas, which was a very high energetic reading of a package called Steamroller, because a lot of jingle packages, they had names like Steamroller or the Flamethrower, which is like what Jam had. And this could descend very deep into a chat about jingles. I don't want this to go too deep into, because I could go on for a long time about them, which is something that Stephanie Hurst would vouch for as well. They were part of the reason I wanted to get into radio, although I understand that styles and fashions have changed. That very energetic style of radio would sound ridiculous now, which is why some presenters like Pat Sharp have evolved their act. Only people like Tony Blackburn can pull it off, because that's what they're known for. They've taken it, they're able to joke about with it. So that's why I think some people can still get away with it, and others sound ridiculous when they try it.
One thing about Tony Blackburn is he can make a cheesy line about any song and the artist.
I find that a bit cringy myself, forced links into the first lines of songs, but I get that other people like that, and it's for them to enjoy.
Yeah, it's very good though. And also one of the good presenters as well is there's a lot of good presenters out there, and there was an ex-presenter on Talk Radio, I think it was, called Dan Wootton.
Oh, a controversial man, Dan Wootton, very outspoken, a journalist for The Sun, which says it all, really.
He don't work. I think he works for GB News now.
That wouldn't surprise me if he does end up joining them.
His show's been taken over by Mark Derlin.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yes.
He was only supposed to be in 2 weeks, Mark Derlin, but then Dan Wootton left Talk Radio without a word.
Yeah, well, that's how most departures in radio seem to go.
He was only
full time.
And then Mark Derlin took over. But a few weeks before that, it was Richard Madeley.
Yes, I have noticed, yeah.
Because Richard Madeley was whinging about lockdown.
Yeah, I've heard him and Van Morrison and quite a few other people are against it and are rather outspoken.
Yeah, he says, Richard Madeley says that Boris Johnson speaks to us like we're dumb 8-year-olds.
Yeah, well, he has the mental capacity of a dumb 8-year-old himself, Boris Johnson. But yeah, that's a completely different subject matter.
Yeah, have you ever been inside the parliamentary buildings?
No, nothing like that. No, I'd like to visit, but no, I've not been in any of the houses of parliament. I've walked past them, but no, I've not.
Have you ever seen any politicians?
I've met Ed Miliband a couple of times at the radio festival and the podcast awards. He was really nice. I think he's the only big name politician I've met. That guy who was on Good Morning Britain, Quasi, whatever it was, he was the mayor, the MP for Spelthorne. I helped out at a short-term station based at the youth centre in Ashford in Spelthorne for a few years ago, and he was there for the opening. So yeah, I have met him.
Yeah, we'll get on now anyway with question 4. How has COVID affected your life and line of work?
Well, I'd actually stopped presenting on the radio a couple of months before the pandemic hit, because after I'd returned to CSR in 2018 to present a different sort of show. It was called Random Within Reason, which every week I'd play a selection of songs from different genres, but were all interlinked within a theme. And it was good fun, but the overall atmosphere and mood at the station had been declining for a very long time. there were hardly any members there, and it was being hollowed out from the inside, and I just wasn't enjoying it as much as I had done. And so around Christmas 2019, I did my final show. It was 10 years after I'd started at CSR, and the show stood up on Mixcloud. It was quite not an explosive finish, but it did lay down a few home truths. I said, I can't carry on pretending to love enjoying a station that's based in Canterbury. It's not a city I chose to live in, and I can't carry on faking it anymore. I want to finish it whilst it's still good. And I thought I might return to radio one day, and I might start enjoying it again, but I need time to recharge my batteries by going on more outings away on beach weekends to places like Devon and Norfolk and Southport. But before I could even start off on that, before I'd even got past one outing, the coronavirus pandemic hit, and it just made me feel even worse. And I didn't just find myself discouraged for wanting to make radio and podcasts. I didn't really feel up to listening to radio and on a daily basis. And it's still been the case. I mean, the only shows I listen to now are Radcliffe and Maconie on Six Music and Lisa Tarbuck on BBC Radio 2. I can sort of stomach at least 2 rounds of Popmaster a week on Ken Bruce's show, but the enjoyment of that starts to wear off after a while, and it's partly because of my condition. I find it hard to. It was when you interviewed Dan Morfitt, he said the way to be really good on the radio is to have life experience and to have a story to tell. I struggle in social situations. Something like this, what I'm doing now, is different because I'm talking to someone who's really enthusiastic about radio in itself. But being able to like have a proper life, how to socialize with other people, that's something I've struggled with because of my condition. And since finishing university, since leaving London, that's got worse. And when you find it, and because when I've heard you talk to other people, certainly people from stations like Radio Humberside, Viking FM, what I get from that is a genuine love for the area. I've never been to Hull, but I get the sense that it's the people that are very chatty, they speak to each other. It's not like that in Ramsgate, and it's certainly not in Canterbury. You could even say that London to a point isn't like that, but I have more affection for London than I do for Canterbury and Kent. And
did you listen to my Neil Fox interview?
Yes, I have listened to that, yes.
Or the Alan Hyde one?
No, yeah, I did say earlier, I meant to listen to the Alan Hyde one, but yeah.
He's the same guy who did the jingles.
The same guy who did the jingles for Ian Collins and Caesar, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to ask him in a bit. Because I have him on the Facebook, you see, and me and him are close friends, you see, because we've started speaking over the last few years, and, you know, yeah.
But I would like to find some way of enjoying radio, but because I didn't touch on it, because I got so sidetracked into talking about like my obsession with other presenters. I haven't really talked about the pitfalls and setbacks that I've had, because after I recorded my bipolar podcast, Inside the Mind of a Hypermanic, I was worrying, what am I going to do after this? Where am I going to go from here? And Folded Wing, they did invite me to pitch documentary ideas for BBC Radio 4. And I thought, well, it's not something I wanted to get into Radio 4, but I thought I may as well give this a go. It could lead to a step on the ladder. And the idea I pitched did get through to the second round, but it didn't get commissioned. And on a very hot July afternoon, it was the same day as the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony in Glasgow, I got sent an email that was rather cold saying that the documentary idea pitched hadn't been commissioned. And that was a kick in the teeth, because there seemed that I'd be able to get over it. And it was onwards and upwards. Good luck in the next round. You can move on to the next round. I had no other ideas. I'm not good at coming up with ideas for documentary or radio programs. I think a way of comparing it to a good comparison here would be, because yesterday I was listening to audio of when Andy Murray won Wimbledon in 2013, the year after he'd lost the year before. There's someone who could bounce back from a setback, but hitting a ball back and forth is not the same as trying to generate that idea for a really good radio program when you're not that good at it. So that's why it hit me harder and started a sort of downward slope, which led to what happened in 2019. I mean, I'd already left CSR once. I came back to do another show there, but it soon realized why it wasn't as enjoyable anymore. And I don't think I could get back into presenting because I don't know what that end goal is anymore. Because I have had some very big highs and achievements that I've managed to get, but I don't know where to go from here. You're in a great position. You're only about 23 years old, is it? You're a lot younger than me. You've got a lot to like go for. You can take all these, 22. You can take all these. You've built up a great portfolio of podcasts with some very interesting people, very good radio people, and from other professions. You've got a lot to like but ahead of you. And whereas I'm 36 years old, which is some viewers quite young. I don't know what I'm going to go from here onwards. I'm sure something will come up, but the industry can be extremely cold, and there aren't that many nice people I've met who I've been able to develop that sort of relationship with. They're certainly not over here in Canterbury or Ramsgate or in London. I'm sure there are really good people, but the current climate makes it difficult for me to actually, I wouldn't know how to break the ice with them.
Can I just apologise for watching talk radio earlier?
No, don't worry about that. That's fine. It's absolutely fine.
I was just keeping across what was happening with the.
No, that's good because you're listening. You're an avid listener and viewer in this case. You've always got it on switched on. That bodes well for someone getting into radio because radio stations like people who listen to their output, and it shows initiative.
And it's changed my opinion about the events because I personally don't think that Priti Patel, as we're going on to tangent, should be sending people around to houses if they've gone to amber countries.
Well, to be quite blunt, without wanting to get too political, she's a very toxic woman, and she's just she's barely human.
Fair enough. Question 5. What advice would you give to young, aspiring broadcasters and podcasters who are starting out?
I'm in no position to give advice. I really can't. I mean, I suppose for some of my experience, I've done a lot, but I don't think I've worked in a professional enough capacity to be in a position to give advice. But what I'd say is find something, what it is in radio you're good at, and let people who are working in radio know that you're good in that, and keep telling them without pestering them, but let you know that you're there, and send them your audio, ask them for their feedback, take it on board, and get better at it. That's as simple as enough as I can put it.
Yeah. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us, Robin. Do join me again.
Absolute pleasure. It's really. I know I may have gone on for a long time, but it was really enjoyable. I love talking about radio, even if I'm not so good at doing it myself nowadays.
Thank you for joining us today. Please give it up for my special guest, Robin blamires. Sorry.
It's an easy mistake to make.
But thank you very much for listening and watching. And that was my interview with Robin blamires. Really hope you enjoyed it. Hope it filled a gap in your time. My next interview upload will be with the one and only Bernie Clifton. So I really hope you enjoy it. And I hope it fills a gap in your time. Thanks very much for watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to do all the usual, like, subscribe and all that stuff. All that good stuff. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. And that's a wrap.